Hello, my name's Rob. I'm going to talk to you about Tableau published data sources. And this is something that took me a little while to understand with Tableau and how best to organize it. So I just wanted to run you through a kind of a live example of how I would go about trying to set up published data sources. So whenever I publish a data source, I'm looking at for 4 objectives. Okay, and sometimes it might not be all of these, but these are all that can apply to publishing your workbooks or publishing your data sources. So I want better governance over my data. So if I'm an analyst or I'm head of a team, I want to be able to publish a data set and know with confidence that it's the right data set, it has the right calculations in it, and that's really the one I want the team to use. Sure, they can go off and connect to their own data sources and use the power of Tableau in that sense, but I want a couple of data sources that are key to our business, key to our decision making, to be governed by centrally. I also want consistent analysis. So if somebody talks about profit margin or sales percentage or something like that we're all talking about the same set of data. Everybody's used the same calculations, and ideally everybody's used the same data set, so that marketing or finance or teams within either of those departments are all using exactly the same set of data to make decisions on. I'd also like the data sets to be reusable, so that if I create a data set, create a workbook, I'd like that data set to be able to be reused in another workbook, so it speeds up. So next time I want to create a new workbook, I can just connect directly and have all that work done. And lastly, I'd like people with Explorer licenses, or in general people in the browser, to be able to connect to data sets that I've made, that are governed, that are consistent across the organization, and are easily reused in the browser. So they're my 4 objectives that I'm trying to achieve with this, and I'll hopefully show you what that looks like in Tableau. So I've already connected to a Microsoft SQL server, and I've brought in just a simple table for this demonstration purposes. Okay, I've got, this is the data here, and if we have a look across, we can see the various fields that are in there. So I'm just going to create something very simple in here. So we'll go to sheet 1, and we might look at country and maybe the number of records. Okay, so I'm going to build something really simple just to get us started. Let's put country onto color. I'm going to assume you all know how to do this. And there's one field I do want to look at, and that's career length. So maybe I want to answer a question like, how many players for these countries have had a career length of more than 10 years? Okay. Okay, so that might be an analysis I want to do. Now, if I just go back to the data source for a second, I've spotted an error. So we can see that this first player here is active from 1892 to 1892, but his career length is listed as 0, which isn't technically true. Okay, he only played 1 match, but he has played for a season or a year within that. So I've now discovered that there's a flaw in this data. I don't have time to go back to the database itself and get this re-engineered. I need to move quicker with my analysis. So what I'd like to do is include a calculated field and actually get rid of this career length field. I don't want my team to be able to use this because I've discovered there's an error in it. So usually what I would do here is I'd create a calculated field. Let's call it career time. And I do the calculation. So that's active 2 minus active from, and this time I'm going to add 1. So add 1 for the current year. So this is the correct calculation, and I may even add in some comments here. Use this as adds current year. Okay, so I'm creating a data source, a documented data source. It has something nice in here. I want to hide career length. That's not something I want anybody to be able to use ongoing. And I also want to create one other calculated field, which is full name. So this is first name. And these are typical things that you do with your data sources. And we'll come back to the objectives now in a second, why this is important. Okay. So suppose now I create another sheet and I want to use that full name. I want to use the career time, and we might put the country in there as well, something like that. Okay, and we can sort that. Right, so this is what I want to do, and then I'm going to put it into a dashboard, and we'll put sheet 1 and sheet 2 up there, and let's just turn on a very simple filter, something like this. Okay, again, I'm keeping this relatively straightforward, and I'm assuming you know how to create these. All right, so that's sorted correctly. We can use our filters and see who the longest serving career for these various people is. Perfect. Now I'm ready to publish this. Okay, so usually what somebody might do is come along and say server publish workbook, and let's put it in here. We'll call it data source test, and this is what's known as an embedded data source. Okay, so if I come down here, I'm interested in just publishing the dashboard, but the data sources section here, you see it's one embedded in the workbook. So what that means is I'm publishing both the workbook and the data source almost as a single document. Okay, so the data source is embedded in the workbook. I can edit this, so I just want to embed my password so somebody doesn't have to log in, and I can click publish. So this goes and publishes the workbook, and everybody's happy. Okay, I've got a dashboard here that somebody's able to come in and to use, and the filters. Okay, but if we jump back to my objectives, in PowerPoint here, is that I don't fulfill all of these. Okay, I've created a workbook and it's usable, but it's actually the data source. I've made some key changes in the data source that I want to make sure people use those fields and not the error-ridden fields that are in there. So that's not really possible. If I opened up a new Tableau document, Tableau workbook, I have to recreate those calculated fields next time. So let's connect to that Microsoft SQL Server again. We'll select the right database and select the same table. But you can see here now I'm connected back to the database, but my calculated fields are not in there. That player who played one match, his career length is 0. We don't have the full name. So we're expecting somebody to come back and either redo that work, or what's much more likely is they create a table, first name, last name, and they drag in the career length. But we know that this is wrong. Okay, so it doesn't help my team. It doesn't make it faster, because even if they're aware that the career length is wrong, they have to go and recreate all those calculated fields, which is a waste of time because it's already done. They may make a mistake with those. It's not been signed off, or there's no real governance. You're letting everybody connect to the source data and kind of make their own calculations, and that's liable to make mistakes. Okay, so it works and you'll get away with it, but it's not necessarily the most efficient way. So let me shut down this second workbook and go back to our original workbook. So this is where we had the calculated fields built in. Now, over time, this would obviously be much more complicated, and you might have much more complicated formulas or much more data structure going on. But for this example, I'm happy enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to server, and this time I'm going to publish the data source. So I'm not publishing the workbook, I'm publishing the data source. So I get a similar window. It's going in that project. We'll call it this. Again, we'll just look at the authentication. So I don't want the user to be prompt. I'm going to embed my password, and I'm happy. And I also get this option to say, update the workbook so it now uses the published data source. I'm going to tick that. What's going to happen here is the icon is going to change, because this workbook is now going to use the new published data source, not the original database. So let's publish that and see what it looks like. It's a relatively small data set, so it shouldn't take too long. And there we are. And here's the difference. Okay, So I can see that it's connected to my Stack database. It's a Microsoft SQL Server. The authentication is embedded. But this is a data source, not a workbook. All right, there is no workbook at the moment here. I can, going back to my objectives, I can create a workbook in the browser. Yes, I can do that. I can click New Workbook as long as I'm a creator or an explorer license on the system. And here I can take full advantage of the full name and the career time. Okay, so I'm allowing somebody in the browser connect to a data source and avail of all the work I might have put into the data source. So that's one objective reached. Reuse data sources for faster analysis. So again, let's try this. So File, New. I'm going to create a new workbook, and suppose this is another colleague, or it's just myself coming in a few weeks' time, and I want to create a new workbook, but I want to use the same data source, and I don't want to have to recreate all those calculated fields like we saw before. So this time I'm going to connect to data, but instead of connecting to my SQL Server and using it that way, I'm just going to connect to Tableau Server. And now we can see our data sources are all here. Okay, so these are all my data sources. And at the very bottom there, the latest one is the rugby player data. So let's connect to that and see what it looks like. Lo and behold, I have a new workbook connected to a centralized managed data source with all the calculated fields built in. So somebody now knows what fields to use for what analysis. We're keeping it all consistent across the board. So that achieves my reusing data sources for faster analysis. It also maintains consistent analysis. So I know that if people have used this data source, the career time is the correct one to use, and the others can get hidden away and tidied up in the data source. And it gives me better governance, because now I know that this is a proper data source, and this is the one that IT or me as the manager or something has signed off on as the correct data source to use. So publishing the data source separately and then connecting workbooks is a much more efficient way to do it by maintaining these four objectives. What that looks like in here is if I go into that folder, I can see a full list of all of the different bits, but you'll see different icons. So this cylinder icon is a data source, sorry, and the workbook icons are here. So I'm able to see that this rugby player data is here. I can toggle it as a favorite. I can go in again and have a look at the connection types. Okay, and I can share, download, do all those types of things within it. So for me, that's a much better way of publishing data sources separately and then connecting workbooks to it at a later stage.